Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. On this episode, I sat down with Jill Rutter. She is the Director of Community Outreach for EndSlaveryTennessee.org. They are an organization that helps survivors of, I almost said victims, and it is important to make the distinction, survivors of human trafficking. Most specifically in this episode, we talk about the global yet local issue of sex trafficking of children, of minors. Now you might think that human trafficking is something that happens overseas. You know, you see it in movies, in the movie Taken, when you read about it in various forms. It's actually a humongous problem here in the United States. There have been several human trafficking busts here in Nashville, Tennessee, Franklin, Tennessee, which we'll talk about on this episode. Atlanta has a huge human trafficking, sex trafficking operation. This makes billions of dollars worldwide, by the way. It's a disturbing thing. This is an intense episode. We're not graphic per se, but if there's any kind of a trigger warning, I suppose it's that this is an intense yet important topic. Parents, I encourage you to listen to this episode and then perhaps go back and listen again with your kids and talk about it. The people that prey on children, they're not just preying on poor children or disenfranchised children. These are kids from all over, every race, every religion, every background, rich, poor. It makes no difference. They're all of our children. And it's really an important episode. I feel very, very strongly about this being heard. I myself have watched several documentaries on human trafficking and most specifically on the sex slavery trade. And it's horrifying. And no one deserves to go through what these kids go through. It's awful. It's been a rough week. Obviously, a lot of stuff has gone down. I don't know. It's hard for me sometimes to go through this world and realize that bad things happen, sometimes on a gross scale, like it did in Las Vegas. And innocent people losing their lives. It's horrible. And the truth be told, though, there are lots of really great, beautiful, wonderful people in this world. And they're doing great, beautiful, wonderful things every day. And I know it's hard to remember that in the wake of tragedies and horribleness and people being mean to each other and hateful rhetoric and just all the stuff. But it's a tiny sliver of what humanity does when they're being lovely. And Jill is a good example of a human being who is quite lovely and is making a difference and is helping people. And there's many like her. So in the wake, I'm not saying don't feel your upsetness. I'm upset. I'm not saying don't feel your pain. I'm in pain. I get it. And it's important to feel those emotions and to understand them and where they're coming from and work through them. But I pray that you also look at all the good stuff that's happening in the world and all the beautiful people who are, and by that I mean beautiful souls, who are really, really, they're making a difference. And sometimes it's small. Sometimes it's just smiling at somebody. When you're walking down the street, just a smile. It goes a really, really long way. So anyway, it's a big episode. I think it's an important one. I hope you listen. Some information I want to give just in case if you or someone you know needs help. There's a few human trafficking hotline numbers. In Tennessee, it's 855-558-6484. The national hotline is 888-373-7888. And you can text HELP, HELP, or info, INFO, to the number 233-733. You can also go to endslaverytn.org or traffeckingresourcecenter.org. And if you see something that seems weird, say something. As I mentioned on this episode, I would much rather somebody say something about me that may be erroneous if it means saving a child or helping somebody who's in trouble. You know what? All that stuff can get worked out in the wash. And you know, I would much rather the thing be said and someone be helped and worry about my reputation later. You know what I mean? So anyway, that being said, the usual stuff, of course, please rate and review Hey Human on iTunes. Y'all have been doing great with that. Thank you. Keep going. It's really helpful. I got a call from Ellen. As y'all know, I talk about her all the time. My friend, she said, my bestie, she said that one of her friends was looking for a podcast and that Hey Human was trending, and so she discovered it that way. So I was really excited about that. I don't know what it means exactly to be trending, but I think it's pretty good. So hopefully more of that, please. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. You can find me at all the social media places. Tweet me, Susan Ruthism. That's SUSANRUTHISM. Email me, susan@heyhumanpodcast.com. Speaking of heyhumanpodcast.com, it's going to have a ton of links for this episode. There's a lot of information. I encourage you, again, go look at it. Watch the documentaries that Jill recommends. Share this information with your loved ones. And it's not just girls, by the way. It's not like human trafficking is just girls. Adults are trafficked for labor, servitude, and boys are also trafficked for sex. This isn't just a little girl thing. I mean, it's more common for sure, but it's non-gender specific. Anyway, please tell your friends and everybody to listen to Hey Human Podcast. Spread the word. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. And here we go. Hi, Jill Rutter.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Welcome to Hey Human Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Where the conversation is always interesting and the coffee is always on.
Yay.
So you are from endslaverytennessee.org for the website. Uh-huh. Explain what that is.
We are an nonprofit organization that's based out of here in Nashville. However, we handle the whole middle region of Tennessee. We are one of 4 single points of contact for the Tennessee Anti-Slavery Alliance. We work with the TBI's Human Trafficking Task Force to provide services for victims of human trafficking.
TBI being Tennessee Bureau of Investigation.
Yes, and we provide services for survivors of human trafficking. That's one of our core missions. But we also work with advocacy. Our founder, Derry Smith, has worked with the state and federal legislature. She's even spoken at the White House. We have been working in conjunction with lawmakers to tighten the laws for human trafficking. And we also do trainings and presentations to let the community become more aware of human trafficking and the problem and the prevalency here in Nashville.
So when people hear human trafficking, I think the immediate place they go in their minds is sex trafficking, which is a humongous problem. But there are several different kinds of human trafficking. There's servitude, right? And
absolutely.
So maybe run through the...
Yes, well, just like you mentioned, there is commercial sex trafficking, and that actually, the commercial sex trafficking is the second fastest and largest growing crime in the country.
I read that $293 million made in 2016 in Atlanta alone.
Right.
That was mind-boggling to me.
Yes, and 32 to 150 billion worldwide. Difference, a wide variety of statistics, but still, it's impressive. And then the trafficking of children is the fastest growing sex crime and largest sex crime. But like you said, there is labor trafficking too, and domestic servitude, bondage. So it might be involved with domestics like maids, nannies, au pairs, that type of situation where it all seems to be fine on the surface. They get their room, they get their board, but that's all they get. They're not allowed to leave the house. They're not allowed to, they don't have any money. Their
passports get taken.
Exactly. So when it's foreign nationals, a lot of times we see like you said, passports, visas taken away. A lot of times they don't even know where they are because of the way that they're trafficked within the country. They may be transported to and from the job site in a van, say, and they're allowed, not allowed to not allowed to see street signs or anything identifying marks. And they're also told that law enforcement and other organizations such as ours are the enemy. We're going to deport them. So all these different threats are in place to make them, kind of indebted to the trafficker. So that's how, that's what we see a lot of times when we have those. And when we think of labor trafficking, it's not always, it's not a situation always where we've got, people are brought in cargo ships or cargo holds, like you see a lot of times on television. They are, a lot of times what you'll see is they can be brought in by train, they can be brought in by bus, they might just be here, they may be answering ads. So it's a wide variety of ways in which they're brought into the country. But one of the things that's really important to keep in mind too, in trafficking in general, is that of the trafficking victims we have in the United States, 83% are American-born citizens. So,
I think repeat that.
83% are American-born citizens of trafficking victims here in the United States. So that kind of blows the theory in a lot of people's mind that they're all brought in here. That we have a problem with trafficking of American citizens within our own borders. So,
are those second language, English as a second language situations, or is
not
it
necessarily?
Okay.
Not necessarily. It could be you and me, our neighbors, our friends, children of our neighbors and friends.
Yeah. Okay. So, gosh, so many questions. It's so horrifying to me that human beings treat other human beings like this. And at the same time, I think, well, I'm not surprised, I guess, too. Mm-hmm. So from my understanding of the research I've done and the documentaries I've seen, when it comes to children, that they have the traffickers have very specific. They're not just taking homeless kids, although that's a great portion of that, but they're trolling for kids online.
Absolutely.
That are in perfectly normal whatever that means, but like happy families and
absolutely,
from the sports star kids to the good students to whatever. It's not like they're just looking for the Dylan Klebold's.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's a really important point to make, because of the fact that a lot of people do think that. They've seen the movie Taken and see how that begins with the two girls being kidnapped. Abduction is not that common. It may be roughly 1% of the way trafficking occurs, because, and what I try to stress to people is, kidnapping is a crime in itself, so you have a lot of risk if you're trying to abduct someone. So why not go ahead and abduct their minds? Make it so that they seem to be willing participants. That's one of the trafficker's skills, I guess it were. So just like you said, it doesn't have to be the homeless, doesn't have to be runaways, though we do see that quite a bit. It's somebody, especially in youth, somebody is missing something, and it's a vulnerability. It's preying on their vulnerabilities.
Which every teenager has.
Oh, absolutely.
By the way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And also, I think it's important to say, this isn't just girls.
Right. 80% are girls, but 20% are boys. And personally, and a lot of other people feel this way, that the 20%, really... we think with boys it's probably underreported just because of our social stigma of reporting sexual abuse for boys. So that's another kind of problem in and of itself. But with traffickers, what they look for is the somebody that feels out of place, somebody that's lonely, shy, bullying victims. And also kids that have been neglected. And when I say neglect, it's not the physical neglect that we think of, somebody who's homeless or whatever, though that does happen. But I mean, this could be somebody who is in a very high dollar neighborhood, but their family doesn't have time for them. And so what happens is they're going to seek an outlet. And the average age of trafficking victims now is 13. So 13 is a very vulnerable age. Mm-hmm. That's where the hormones are, and their questions, and they're half children, half adults, and there's a lot of things going on. So it's easy for a trafficker to prey on those pieces, those missing pieces.
Sure, they become the role of parent, lover. They
exactly. They'll feed whatever need there is, and like you said, the internet now has become like the superhighway of human trafficking.
Dark web stuff, but it's not just the dark web, right? In
no.
fact, I was reading about the lawsuits with Backpage.com. Mm-hmm. First of all, mortified about the Village Voice owned them, the most progressive paper in the land. And that was insane. The whole thing. So Backpage.com, for those of you that don't know, it's kind of like the back of any one of your local newspapers. It has the advertisements, and usually there's, your clairvoyants and your massage therapists and your hypnotherapists and your dog trainers and, all these random things. But the human traffickers, that's where on the back page was where they were posting these. Mm-hmm.
And they also, too, with Backpage, with the internet piece of it, what they were doing is they were advertising for like escort services, but the way they made it kind of looked benign. But what happened is that Craigslist used to be like that, but Craigslist kind of cleaned up their act. So they have it used to be you have to specify a dollar amount if you sell something on those ads. So if you're going to sell a sofa, you can't put just the dollar signs. You have to put it $60 or whatever. Mm-hmm. But on Backpage, they didn't have to do that. So what they did was they turned around and they would advertise for escorts or dates or whatever, but then they'd have key phrases like fresh face, new in town, which would be kind of the key words to alert people that they were minors, that's what they were selling. Mm-hmm. And they had a 2-year investigation, and they arrested the CEO and I think 2 of his direct underlings, and they were out for about a week. And they're back up again. I mean, so it's really, really hard.
They're protected by that. There's a caveat, a loophole in the internet laws. Mm-hmm. So
and
which I'll post about that on my links page. I encourage you guys to get into that, because while it does protect the internet in some places that need protecting for sure, it's also protecting very nefarious characters who are engaging in these acts. So talk about your organization a little bit.
Okay. So we've been around for, I think, almost over 10 years now. And our CEO, Derry Smith, is also our founder. She did some mission work overseas and ran into this problem overseas. Because of job situations, she ended up, coming back here and found out how prevalent it was here in Nashville, Tennessee, and then Nashville in particular. So
when you say she just said, "Oh my gosh, this is going on." Did she read about it or something?
She read about it, and she was exposed to it. I mean, she did a lot of research on it, and she's quite knowledgeable on the whole, every facet of it. And she came back, and that's where we've gotten a lot of her statistics from a lot of our research. There's 94 minors are trafficked in Tennessee every month.
94 in Tennessee every month.
Yeah, in Tennessee.
That is to me, that is a huge number.
It is. And we've got a lot of things going for us, like, with Nashville, with, sports and, concerts and conventions, and also we have a big draw. But so we've formed this organization. We had she started very small. She started going door to door with information, everything out of the trunk of her car. Mm-hmm. Then she started developing the organization. Got a great board of directors behind us, and we got an intervention specialist that was a survivor herself, which was great, because that ended up being one of our real strong suits, because we were able to go on stings with the Human Trafficking Task Force of the TBI and we would go ahead, or she would be the first face that they would see. So that was great, because then they would, it would be like you and I could go and we would have our total hearts into it. But, these survivors are trusting. Trust is the first thing taken away from them. So they would, she would say, I've walked it, I've talked it, and we can help you. And if they were willing to come to us, we would, bring them into the program. And that's the way it is today. We have a program where we provide, things like therapy. They almost all have some kind of mental health disorder from the trafficking itself. PTSD is, of course, most prevalent. We also, a lot of them are drug addicted, and that's kind of goes hand in hand.
I'd like to touch on that for a second too.
Yeah.
So, let's say I'm this young girl, and I get into I get trafficked. Mm-hmm. So probably one of the first things they start doing is getting me addicted to drugs.
Exactly. If you're not compliant, say if I'm a trafficker and you're not going to do what I want you to
Which
do.
is more than likely.
Yeah, absolutely.
These young girls, I keep stressing that. These are children, are being raped up to 40 times a day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so they will, 9 times out of 10, like you said, for a compliance issue, they'll shoot them up with heroin. Heroin is fast acting, causes a real quick addiction. And so then, as far as the manipulation, they'll turn around and say, hey, here's the door. You can go ahead and go out. But, in a few hours, you're going to need something. And, of course, I've taken your money, since I'm the trafficker.
And your parents don't love you. And
exactly.
I love you. And
I love you.
Yeah.
This is your home now.
Now, see, people listening are probably like, well, gosh, if you have good parents that are pretty normal or whatever, how can you fall prey to this? But it's not... The cult is a good example. Kids, even religion to some extent, it's like it doesn't take much to get a brain on board with something.
Exactly. Because what they do is they don't abduct them very often. So they're going to develop a relationship with them.
First.
They're going to develop this relationship. They're going to be the piece of trust.
And they're on the Twitter, they're on the Snapchat.
Oh, sure.
Snapchat, I heard, is like the big one.
Yeah, Snapchat is Tinder now. And Facebook even. Facebook will, with Facebook, you don't say, like, you don't have to, you can put up, I think, up to 3 profiles on Facebook. And basically none of them have to be you. You can put any name you want, any picture you want. Mm-hmm. So, and I've used an example with kids where you could put like a 16-year-old photo of Channing Tatum or something like that, where he's good looking, but you might not make the connection that it's Channing Tatum, but he looks great, and you're lonely. You're the lonely girl, you're new in town, you don't have a boyfriend, you want that because
you're just a regular junior high school kid.
Yeah, exactly. And so, all of a sudden, if the trafficker, whatever, who is posting this profile sees where you live, where you go to school, your likes and dislikes, where you're checking in, they can make sure, they all of a sudden like what you like. So then there's that common bond or what seems to be a common bond. And then there's going into a chat room or a messenger, and they start talking it up and developing a relationship. Mm-hmm. And then when that happens, and we also have boyfriending where, that's kind of a type of boyfriending, but we've had kids, like even in high school, that have boyfriended the lonely girl and then turn around and a family member's the trafficker. And we've had that type of situation. And so when that happens, your trust is totally violated. You don't know who to trust anymore. But then the trafficker turns around and does the honeymooning, where they make it sound like they really love you, and you're like, okay, this will work. This is better than what I've had before. But then every once in a while, they'll turn around with the psychological abuse and physical abuse with beatings, rapes, whatever,
right.
And then they'll turn around and tattoo them or brand them. This is another way of helping the victim lose their identity and having the trafficker more declare ownership.
Is there something people can look for? Is there a certain brand or a tattoo that...
Not a certain one. Usually it's location. Usually it's on the neck. Usually it's the name of the trafficker or his nickname or street name if he has one. sometimes it may not be just a name, but a symbol of what they, that's, familiar or represents the trafficker. Sometimes too, that's the kind of an obvious one, but sometimes they look malnourished. Sometimes they will have signs of abuse in various stages of healing. Sometimes poor dentition because they're not taken to medical centers. We found that actually they do more than we think, but they don't go to a dentist. They've had beatings. I mean, we've had survivors that have teeth missing because they were kicked out or whatever.
Wasn't there a flight attendant recently that...
Yes, there was. And I'm glad you mentioned this because that segues into one of the biggest pieces that I like to tell people to look for. The flight attendant on a particular airline was noticing a man that was with a young girl, and there was nothing physical about the young girl that stood out. It was the relationship. She looked like it was not an interactive relationship. There was just something off. It did not seem like a father and a daughter. It didn't seem like, she just kind of, the girl had apparently a particular expression on her face. She was kind of withdrawn. So the flight attendant had been trained in what to look for in human trafficking. She went to the bathroom and wrote a message and said, are you safe? And so somehow the flight attendant was able to get the girl to go to the restroom. The girl wrote, "No, I'm not." And so the flight attendant, they notified the law enforcement, and they were there. And that was that was trafficking right there. And trafficking, now that was on a plane, but trafficking does not have to be physical transporting. That's
Sure.
that's not necessarily what that term means. So.
Yeah. And then I just read about another woman that was sitting behind a man on a plane that saw his texts, and he was talking with some woman back in my home state in Washington, and they were planning on doing stuff to 2 small children. And then that woman spoke up. I mean, that is so important, if you see something, if your intuition is screaming at you, I'd rather be accused of something and find out that it wasn't, a real thing, knowing that the children are safe.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
I think that's super important.
It is.
Don't be a lunatic about it, but certainly alert somebody who can handle it.
It's see something, say something. And when we tell people about like the human trafficking hotline, we tell people do not be afraid to do that because it's anonymous and, there's no repercussions, and I've told people in the medical profession too, you're not going to be, suffer from the hospital or the clinic. There's not going to be backlash. You have to do something. And that's, one of the things that we've become, afraid to step out or used to some of these things. And so we really have to
we may not even realize what we're seeing.
Yeah.
I think now that it's starting to become more talked about like anything else.
Yes.
I mean, and the stigma and the shame, quote unquote, of anything surrounding sex abuse is getting more vocal, which will hopefully get better. And we just had a big bust here in Tennessee. Were you guys involved with that? We
weren't involved specifically, but the TBI Human Trafficking Hotline or Task Force was involved, and the district attorney. So that was a nail/spa salon in the Hermitage area.
So a nail salon.
Yeah, so nail, and that is what we've had. We've had one in Franklin too. We had an arrest about a year and a half ago in Franklin, and also about 2 years ago in Green Hills. Same type of situation. These were
Green Hills.
Yeah,
right, that's super fancy neighborhood.
Exactly.
The most expensive mall in Tennessee.
Absolutely. And with this particular nail parlor in Hermitage, a lot of people posted on Facebook, I went there. So it was very, very popular. It was, and it wasn't none of these places are seedy looking. They're very, very legitimate looking. And legitimate for all practical purposes.
Was it sex trafficking or worker trafficking?
It was both, actually. So what happened in this particular case, it was a nail/spa. So you could go in and get your nails done, you get a spa treatment, and then there's a back room. So there were 13 to 15 young women, Asian women that were brought in. So this was a classic example of labor/sex trafficking. And the perpetrator, the trafficker, was a woman. And she and her husband, but the woman was the primary one that was doing this. So this is why I tell people, and this is one of those things, see something, say something. If you go into a nail parlor, a lot of Asians will come over to do those because that's what they're used to, and that's the kind of work they do, and they do a wonderful job. So, I want to stress it's not all nail parlors. It's not all nail parlors with, Asians with it, in them. But, be aware. Watch the interactions of the employees and in backroom activities and things like that. Just kind of keep your eyes and ears open.
I'm curious, what does the madam say? Does anybody say, why are you doing this? Is it just because of the money, or are they broken somehow? I mean, what creates a person that does that?
That's really both. It's a supply and demand. It makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
So this is one of those things. It's low risk. So somebody can be operating what appears to be a legitimate business. Then it's very low risk. Again, if people don't know and they go in and they keep doing this, and as long as they don't get caught and they're making great money, they're just going to keep on. But a lot of it is a lot of broken people. We have found that as hard as it is for, and it's hard for me sometimes to have any kind of sympathy for a trafficker at all, but we are finding that they are broken too. So they have had problems in their lives too, so that this seems like an acceptable, normal and acceptable option for life. And even we have found that 90% of traffickers that have been sexually abused end up being traffickers, when they were kids, so that they end up being traffickers when they're adults. So it's quite a sad story in that everybody is broken. It's just in a system that does not know enough to help mend all of this. And it's it's one of those situations where if the trafficker comes from a broken home, nobody's going to think ahead of time, when they were children, that this could happen. But we need to fix things when kids are young, when things are happening, so that it doesn't evolve into this kind of situation.
So what happens when you go in, you bust up that kind of situation, and you are faced with a bunch of people who aren't even from this country? Do they get to stay here and get better, or do they?
They usually do. What has been established is what we call a T visa. So what happens with foreign nationals, if they're here in this country and they become victims, if they are willing to testify against their trafficker, they're allowed to stay here on a T visa for whatever length of time. And our organization will provide services for them, again, for whatever they need, psychological, safety, whatever. Our organization, though, usually, or the TBI, will work with Homeland Security and the Immigration Service with those people. If they're not willing to testify, if they don't want to, usually we'll help them go, or I shouldn't say usually it's Homeland Security will allow them to go back or help them go back home.
Yeah. So. Man. So what are some of the things that parents or friends I feel like I was the third child, so by the time I came along, my parents were oblivious. They had already, I have two older brothers, so they were just exhausted. So I think some of these kids, it's their friends might notice before the parents, or the siblings might notice. So what are some of the things to look for?
Usually in a case like that, the victim will become withdrawn or start to isolate themselves from others. They won't say, like, if they usually hang with a group of friends, they might, have other plans. Truant in school. One good thing about Tennessee is we do have strict laws about truancy, and we, watch that. But they will become truant or call in sick a lot. They will also maybe seen with an older man, or I should say older person, because women are traffickers too.
Sure.
They also might have new clothes. If they're old enough to have a car, they might have a car. So the jewelry, their situation might change where it looks like they're getting lots of gifts from people. So those are some of the key things to watch out for. We have had kids that have been trafficked like during lunchtime, especially if it's familial trafficking and family. And some families will traffic their own children, and they will do work during the week, or during lunchtime, and then go
So
home.
these are parents that are taking their children out of school during lunch, trafficking them, and then bringing them back to school.
Yeah, usually and sometimes it's not necessarily a direct correlation like that, but we've had, where they've said an uncle has done that. If that doesn't happen as often, most of the time they're pulled out of school.
Yeah.
But we've had situations where we've had families that traffic their children. The youngest we've had, it was before I joined the organization, I'm glad, was 4, and she was trafficked for money and or for drugs and a car for the parents. So we see that.
So that means the parents traded the child for sex for drugs. Lovely.
That happens sometimes. Somebody's late on rent, so they'll turn around and send the kid down to the landlord. There's all sorts of ways in which that happens, and drugs are usually the center of it, and so drugs are amazing draw for if somebody gets that desperate that they feel they have to do that.
And we are in a crisis, obviously, as far as our addictions are concerned.
Absolutely.
Man, when I research this stuff, of course, I go down a very depressing rabbit hole, but I read that a lot of Americans will pay to go to countries like Thailand and such and do unspeakable things to very, very young children. And that there's actually, that's a whole big thing in and of itself.
It is. It really is. American tourists provide a lot of the business for foreign countries like that. And what happens, and the reason it's so easy over in those countries is because, say like Cambodia, their whole population was pretty decimated with the Khmer Rouge during the Vietnam War, and so that country is still in the rebuilding phase. So what happens is, and they don't have the access to federal funds like our country does, so even though that it's basically against the law in their country, they have to almost turn a blind eye, because if a family is able to support itself in whatever manner, then they don't like it, but it's a family that's somehow being taken care of. Yeah.
Even if it means they're selling
their
children.
So they don't support it, they don't encourage it or condone it, but they don't have the resources to really stop it, and that's why that happens there too.
How did you get involved in this?
Well, ironically, Cambodia.
Really?
Actually, I was a pediatric nurse practitioner. I had worked at St. Jude and other places, so I was used to working with populations that were traumatized and going through a whole lot. And I wanted to do a little bit more. I wanted something that was a little bit outside of the box, I guess, as it were. And I was writing, as a nurse practitioner, I was writing, orders and things, but I liked the part where I was helping families on the outside. So I actually looked into what I could do in that way. So I actually joined an organization called Freedom's Promise that's here out of Nashville, and went on a medical mission trip to Cambodia and saw it firsthand, saw 2 acts of human trafficking right in front of my eyes.
How do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, one of the times was we were at the railroad slums in Phnom Penh, and there was a gentleman that came on a motorcycle and dropped 2 kids off in the morning, and they were teenagers. They gave them money, and they ran back into their shack basically, and he just looked at me and I looked at him, and there was nothing we could do, and he knew it. And he was not Asian, he was an American or European. And then one night in our hotel, we actually saw about a little bit after 10 o'clock at night, a young girl, probably about 9 or 10, dressed totally, dressed to the nines. Yeah, kind of, but in their, like native dress and all of that, taken up to a hotel room. And so when I saw that, it was just mind-boggling. So when I came back here, I couldn't afford to keep going to Cambodia, unfortunately. But when I came back here, Freedom's Promise sister organization was in slavery. So I looked into it, became a volunteer, and then when they had an opening for the director of community outreach, I jumped on it and been there ever since. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So from the victims' perspectives, which you get a lot of people back, talk about it. Just what what happens with them? How do they? What is? I just don't even know how to ask the question. Where are they when you get them emotionally and physically and all that? And how long? I mean, everybody's different, I'm sure.
Sure,
but with the
absolutely.
journey of getting them back, and some of them don't come back, I'm sure.
Right.
In their minds and their hearts
Right.
and their souls. How do you come back from that?
It's very, very hard. We get them from, of course, obviously the arrests or the sting operations that TBI does, but we also have a Cherished Hearts Court, so they get referred from that. That's one of 5 human trafficking courts in the country, and it opened January 26th of 2016.
So a court that's specific to this,
to human trafficking victims.
Wow,
Yeah,
good.
yeah. So they address that, and they're kind of sentenced to end slavery to our program. If they correctly go through the program, they do well. They maintain being clean and sober. They get a job. They basically they're rehabilitated. Their records are expunged. So this.
Wait, why would they have records if they're if they're the victims?
Very good. That's a very good. Well, the way the law is in Tennessee, or actually the U.S. Department of Justice, trafficking, the definition of human trafficking is recruiting, receiving, transporting, transferring, or harboring a person or persons through force, fraud, or coercion for commercial sex, labor, domestic servitude in exchange for anything of value. If you're under 18, force, fraud, and coercion don't have to be proven. You're automatically a victim of human trafficking. So for victims that are under 18, it's easy to go ahead and automatically get resources for them, or it is now. Now the DCS is aware and on board with everything. The problem is, if somebody's over 18, it is hard to prove force, fraud, and coercion, and they weren't self-prostituting. What we've been trying to stress to everybody is nobody grows up wanting to be a prostitute, and so something happens in their life, and that's the piece that we're trying to get everybody on board with. And they also will, sometimes if they're going through the human trafficking court, they may have other records, drugs,
Sure.
And then of course proving the prostitution or whatever. But a lot of times it's drugs or.
Well, now you bring up a good point. So a sex worker.
Mm-hmm.
Who, let's say you're a runaway at 16, you're considered adult in many states.
Mm-hmm.
So you're a runaway, and many runaways, especially like gay kids that get kicked out of the house, or whatever, and then they turn to sex working as a means. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that's still human trafficking.
It is. It's still human trafficking. It still is, because it's a means to an end.
Pimp, usually, and.
So there's still a vulnerability
Yeah.
in exchange for anything of value. So human traffickers can be considered caregivers now by law because they provide food and shelter, but of course it's inadequate. So the child can receive services and again be considered a victim of human trafficking. So it is, definitely children will. That's still trafficking.
Do you feel like the laws still somewhat protect the bad guys?
I think it's gotten much better. I think it is. The penalties are such that the way it works is, and I'll get back. I kind of segued out, but I'll get back to what the no. But the penalties, like prostitution's misdemeanor, but trafficking is a felony, and especially for minors, it's like for 18 to 15 is a certain number of years, 15 to 12 is a certain number of years, 12 and under is certain, and it's a higher penalty.
Okay,
it's a higher penalty,
jail time.
Right? And then if the act occurs close to a school or a church, it raises it one level of penalty for whatever, or one level of felony, for each level. But when we get victims and everything, trust is totally violated. When they come in, the intervention specialists will sometimes take them around our office, and sometimes they won't look at us, or they'll glare at us, or they're just unsure, and it's totally understandable because they don't know who to trust anymore, and some of them don't want to be there. So a lot of them, the trust is a big thing. There's a lot of anger, resentment. Sometimes because of what has happened to them, the trauma, they are cognitively not as developed as others would be at their age level. They don't have the intermixing of the social interaction with others their age. So they might say, like, you might have a 20-year-old that comes in, but then something happens, and it may be simple, like they can't go somewhere that they want to go, and instead they turn around and act out like a 15 or 16-year-old, and you're like, well, this is kind of strange. Well, a lot of times when we've seen that happening, I've gone to a care coordinator and said, how old were they when they were trafficked? 15 or 16. So their cognitive development, just stops where they are. So that's another area that we have to work with. So we always take them where they are. And, of course, like we mentioned earlier, the drug addiction is a big piece. So we have other places like the mental health co-op that we work with, the emotional trauma. We have 2 therapists in our office that are from the sexual assault center that are trained in trauma therapy, and they work with the survivors. We also have relationships with major hospital organizations like HCA and St. Thomas, so that they will help.
Well, they're trained to know what to look for too.
Yes,
correct?
yes, and the Next Door. There's several organizations now that are like our community partners, Hope Clinic for Women. So we were able to reach out to these different people and work with them in such a way that we're able to provide services for our survivors, and then they in turn now, since we've worked with them, know how to identify a survivor and can refer them back to us, because the Next Door will have that. Next Door is an organization that works a lot with drug addiction, but now they can sit there as they're working with those, say, they'll find out a history going, I think this looks like, we've talked to this survivor, it looks like this person may be a victim of human trafficking, and they refer to us. So, and those community partnerships are really important, because without them, and that makes a big headway in identification too.
What are the statistics on runaways and and not just runaways? Because in these days, I feel like it's more people getting thrown out of their houses than them being runaways.
Sadly, yes. Mm-hmm.
What are the statistics there with?
Usually, for runaways and homeless, usually one of every 3 is approached by a human trafficker within 48 hours. They will be outside the National Rescue Mission, bus stations, malls, parks, especially for the children. And then also we've got, like you had mentioned about the lesbian gay community, they end up being throwaways. If a child is getting to that point in time, a child or actually anybody is getting to that point in time where they're having those questions, if they don't have a safe place to go, if their family is not receptive and open-minded enough to be able to have a good conversation with them and make them also feel safe while they work this out, they will be throwaways also, and they
is
will.
The parent not culpable if I throw out my child because they came to me and said I'm gay or lesbian or trans or whatever, and I throw that child out, and that child then goes to the streets, ends up getting trafficked? Am I not culpable? How is that not illegal in some way?
Well, it goes to it's a slippery slope. I think I think it's I feel the same way, because if my child came up to me like that, I would certainly have that conversation. I've had kids that have come up to me and said, what would you think if I told you? And I'm like, I don't care. I want you to be happy. But the truth of the matter is you're right. There is culpability, but it's more emotional culpability, because there's that thin line between the same situation as if a child is rebellious, and the family says, we can't take this anymore, you have to leave. So that child too is as vulnerable as the lesbian gay child. So you're right, and I feel the same way, but it's one of those situations. And we have had families where that was not the situation necessarily, but the child was trafficked as an adult, or as a young person. They've been, they may be an adult, and the families now disown them because they were in that life or they were drug addicted. And so now, even as we're working with them, they may turn around and
the irony is when they need the love most of all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, I think it's so important that when I've talked about human trafficking with people that I know, with friends or whatnot, most people think this is a situation of something that happens overseas.
Right.
No
Right.
one really, which boggles my mind. I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is a humongous problem in the United States.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How are we going to combat? I mean, how?
The awareness is a major piece for
Yeah.
people to understand and make that differentiation that yes, indeed, it does happen overseas, but just as much, going back to the 83% of the victims here in the United States are American born, and also realizing that there's not a particular area that's more vulnerable than others. I've had people that have actually, said to me, isn't it more often, in Lower Antioch, because they want to believe and hope to believe that there's
bad part of
ethnicity.
town,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
A bad part of town
Only
or a
African
lower
Americans
income.
or
Exactly.
Armenians or
Certain
whatever.
ethnicity.
Sure.
And does it happen? Yes, absolutely. But there's a lot of trafficking in Franklin. So people have to
Franklin,
realize.
by the way, for those of you
Oh,
listening
yes.
that are not from around here, Franklin is a very affluent part of Tennessee. It's very large homes, very beautiful shops, very picturesque. They do the
A lot of our
Dickens
country
Christmas.
artists live there.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's very high end. So
Yeah. So people have to realize that. And there's a study that was done. It was completed about 6 years ago. We're actually trying to get some more statistics. But there was a study done about 6 years ago. It took 2 years, and the TBI worked on this statistic and trying to find out what the prevalence was in Tennessee. And they looked at all the counties in Tennessee, did studies with reports from law enforcement and, all sorts of different resources. And they found that of the counties, I think there are 95 counties in Tennessee. I apologize if I'm mistaken. But 85 of them had reported at least one case of human trafficking in a 2-year period. And one case is not necessarily one person. It depends on how successful the trafficker is. It can be a very large group. And of those counties, 4 of them reported over 100 cases of human trafficking. And the counties were Davidson, where Nashville is, Shelby, where Memphis is, Knox, where Knoxville is, and then Coffee County. And Coffee County, for those that don't know, is a very small county, very rural. Tullahoma, I think, is the biggest town there. And there's an annual festival called Bonnaroo. That's kind of like a mini
music festival.
Yeah,
Bonnaroo,
music festival. Yeah,
sure.
So it's in the Woodstock. That was the word I was trying to say, a mini Woodstock. But people didn't, automatically it was like a knee-jerk reaction again. How is it happening in Coffee County where it's not, as prevalent as these other higher population counties? And so some law enforcement says it's Bonnaroo. Well, Bonnaroo is only 3-4 days long, and it's not. Again, it's not Woodstock or anything. So what they found is that there's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of high unemployment, and there's also a lot of group homes. And because of that, with group homes and foster care foster homes are also an area where there have been kids that have been underserved through most of their lives and are more vulnerable to trafficking. So we think that that's where that comes from.
So you mentioned Bonnaroo, which actually reminded me of something I wanted to ask about, and that was I saw a poster about human trafficking, and it said the Super Bowl is one of the worst situations, and I was trying to I didn't have a chance to look it up, but I'm assuming it's because you have humongous amounts of people flooding into a town, and therefore people who do traffic humans that would be a big boon or something?
Yeah,
it's
yes and no.
Or is it metaphorical? I mean, I didn't know what that meant exactly.
It's a kind of yes and no question. Basically, during Super Bowl, there are a lot of people, and with that extra influx, law enforcement is more on the alert for things that go on. But what we're finding out, and we try to make sure that people don't think it's just that. Because, to give an example, I contacted our counterpart in Houston, or one of our organizations is very similar in Houston that works with law enforcement in the Houston area after they had their Super Bowl year before last. And there were, I think she said, like 148 extra cases. And if you think of the size of the Super Bowl and the number of people, and the number of people in Houston, to begin with, and all the extra influx of people, that wasn't a very large amount. of increase.
Okay, so it was more metaphorical, maybe.
Yeah, people. Well, that's again what we try to be. Yes, it does occur, but I think the message we want everybody to take home is that it doesn't happen. That's not the only time it happens.
Sure.
So we don't again want people to have that knee-jerk reaction. Go, oh, here comes the Super Bowl in San Diego or Miami or whatever. They're going to have that, and then when it goes, that nothing else is happening.
Sure,
yeah.
Right. It's not like it goes away with the circus.
Exactly.
I think too, any place you have, like a town like Nashville, where you have all these hotels and there's lots going on and there's always something happening.
Yes.
That, again, you have more opportunity for people, again, who have nefarious intent.
Well, like you mentioned, the hotels too. A lot of us know a seedy motel. We drive around them, we see them.
Dickerson Pike.
Oh, yeah. They're definitely. But there's some motels and hotels that we automatically, again, think, wow, there must be stuff happening in there. And there are. But there's trafficking in the Omni. There's trafficking in the Lowe's.
Which are very fancy, $600 a night hotels.
And no offense to any of those hotels.
They're nice hotels.
Yeah, they're nice hotels. And again, I mentioned those two, but it can be everywhere because
it's
hard to identify
against the hotel. It's not saying that the hotels are responsible.
Absolutely
it's just
not.
I think that's the thing. It's like I want to ram that home is the fact that this is not a poverty problem. This is a human problem. This is rich, poor, white, black, Latino. It doesn't matter. It's it's happening across the board.
Exactly. I have a slide and a piece I include in my trainings now for us that show traffickers. And one is an Army colonel, a white Army colonel.
Who was convicted of trafficking?
Of trafficking, I think in Texas. There's two of them that were children's pastors that were seized in the sting in Knoxville last year. There's a high school coach. There's a billionaire in California, and there's showing of a trafficking ring that include a woman there that helps to lure the victims. It's all demographics. It really doesn't.
This isn't a race thing.
Yeah, it's not. In fact, I had this mentor training, and I showed the slide, and the Army colonel's very, very handsome young white man, and one of the people in the training looked up. She said, "Please tell me the gentleman on the top right hand is not a trafficker." And I said, "Absolutely, yes, he is, and a very successful one." So a lot of times, so this again.
So that's a court martial, first of all.
Oh yeah, for him, absolutely.
And I would imagine that for him, the penalties were even greater than if he had been just a regular quote unquote citizen, because our justice system doesn't throw the book at you like the military does.
No, I'm sure his penalties were probably tenfold compared to what everybody else was.
So what is the penalty for being a human trafficker?
It goes case by case, and it depends on the age of the victim. It depends on what other crimes were committed as a part of it. Yeah. It can range anywhere right now we have a few that have been 5 or 6 years to 60 years. So it's kind of all across the board, but that's one of the things we're trying to do is to strengthen those laws too.
Yeah.
We also are part of, or we provide trainers or speakers for the John School, which works with the Magdalene program here in Nashville. The Magdalene program is
phenomenal.
Yes, they're a wonderful program
work with sex workers.
Yes, and so they've been phenomenal, and they work. There's our district attorney works with them, and one of our district attorneys. And so what happens is, if you have been arrested for first-time solicitation of prostitution, you have a choice. You can go to the John School and plus pay $300, which goes to the Magdalene program, or you can go to jail for 6 years. And of course, most of them opt for to go to the John School. And so they go to the John School and they learn about the humanity piece of it, that the victim is somebody's, wife, daughter, brother, son, to put a face, to the victim. And you learn about STDs, learn about, so it's really kind of a rehabilitation program, hopefully. And this is one of hopefully the prevention, demand abatement that we try to participate in. But if you're arrested a second time, you cannot pass go or get
Sure.
$200. You are going to go to jail. So
What is the STD rate? Do you have those kind of numbers? Is
I
it
don't have
astronomical?
it's yes.
I mean, if you're raping a child for 40 times a day, my guess is they're not being super safe.
No, and traffickers get more money if the victim doesn't wear a condom. Usually,
yeah.
I mean, if the
Yeah,
John doesn't wear a condom.
Right.
So STDs are quite common. We also age. Luckily, we don't see as much as HIV.
Yeah.
But that's because, of course, the way the medical side of it, how well that's worked. But what happened? We've also seen a lot of hepatitis C too, especially from the drug addiction.
Oh, sure.
So
Dirty needles and things.
yeah, so they have a lot of health problems when they come to us.
So now, as I read about Bitcoin getting more and more prevalent, and this is, where money isn't traceable anymore. It's like you're fighting this uphill battle. It's Sisyphean.
We are.
How do you, Jill? How do you emotionally deal with all this stuff?
It's very, very hard. It's like I have to dwell and seek happiness in the accomplishments.
Yeah.
And I have to go into work every day knowing it might be one step forward, two steps back. We have, when I'm around victims, survivors, they're so wonderful and so loving and so appreciative that spurs me on. I don't ever want to throw my hands up. I tell the direct service people, I said, you all are so lucky because you get to see them all the time, but they come in my office a lot of time and love on me, and I take their faces with me when I go on presentations or talk. I'm, like right now, I'm thinking of several of them in my head, because that's what keeps me going. I have to remember why I do what I do, and those are the successes. Those are the ones that we kind of have the sense of accomplishment. It takes sometimes 2 to 5 years for our survivors to get totally out of it, and not only just the business, but out of their mindset that they deserve something better.
Well, I noticed you said victim survivor.
Yeah,
there's a big difference.
There really is. So the minute they come through our door, they're a survivor, and so when I go back and forth, I slip.
Sure, no,
but
I think it's important for people to
yes,
hear that.
Absolutely. So the minute a person comes in our door, they're a survivor, because they've made that step. Either whether or not they wanted to or not, we know they may not know at the time that they're kind of on the road to something better. And so, and 7 to 8 relapses is not uncommon.
Or they go back to their trafficker?
Sometimes they do. A lot of times it's drugs. And sometimes it's not the hardcore drugs. It may be an opioid or whatever, which we always think is a compliment in some ways. You're like, okay, you took a Xanax, or, you did this, but that's okay. This is, well, it's not necessarily okay, but and sometimes they'll do that, and they'll turn around and come back and say, hey, you drug test me, I took this, and we consider that a success, because they bounce right back and say, I shouldn't have done that. Sure. And, I'm sorry, and let me, keep going. But that's one of the things that we kind of stress is when they make their successes. There is a piece of this that is kind of sad when you just now said they go back to the trafficker. When it goes back to the trust and the honeymooning and the relationships with the trafficker, there are those that are in love with their trafficker. We call that the Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bond.
Yeah. The FBI profiler and I talked about that a couple episodes ago.
Good. Well, then everybody, your listeners have a baseline knowledge then. That's great.
But still, for those who maybe didn't hear that episode.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So trauma bond, really, Stockholm Syndrome is when you turn around and basically are so entrusted and so invested into the person that you're with, the trafficker, abuser, or whatever, that you have this relationship with them that you still can't break it. You still can't let go. So what happens with that is if we have a survivor in there that's still communicating with the trafficker, and a lot of traffickers will try to get them to come out and go back to them. And if they have a relationship, especially if they have kids with them or whatever, they'll go back. And that's a hard thing. If they've gone back with the trafficker, We do get some of them back, but that's a hard thing to break because that's almost like with their...
What is the rate of that?
I don't have a statistic on that. Yeah, it doesn't happen that often, but it is a challenge, and that's one of the challenges that our therapists, I think, and the care coordinators probably have in having that talk continuously. Like, in fact, one of our the intervention specialists that initially started with us, she says, "No one loves you that hits you. No one loves you that takes advantage of you. No one loves you that rapes you. I don't care what they've said, what they've given you, what the flowers, sweet things, whatever. They don't truly love you if they've ever laid a hand on you." And that's the piece we try to, get across to them. But it's hard if that's the only person that they got anything from. So that's hard to work with.
Yeah, the humans need touch, and unfortunately, even if it's a violent touch, if it's the only touch they're getting, I mean, it's one of the things I want to talk about. Two things. One is the bracelet you're wearing, the branded bracelet, and also I want to talk about what we talked about a minute ago off the microphone, was that when shame and fear and not talking about things leads to this space where bad things happen. So can we talk about that for a second? Because I think that's an incredibly important thing to talk about.
Yeah. It's, if you don't do anything, it's you can't say, that you didn't expect this or whatever. It's like,
you have to have the conversations with the kids, and you have
to get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
You have to step out of your comfort zone. You have to be, if you're a parent, you have to be a parent. If you have kids on the internet, have a conversation with them about this.
No matter how uncomfortable it feels.
Yes, absolutely. You have to make sure that you make kids aware of not putting where they are or what they do or who their friends are. And it makes sometimes some of the social media boring, but it makes it a lot safer. You don't accept friend requests from people you don't know. But you also have to, again, step out the boundaries of talking about of having the talk with kids so that they understand what respectable relationships are, what healthy relationships are, and make sure that you have open communication with your child on any subject. I have to
say, so my parents, from when I was, and maybe this is young, but both of them are professors, so maybe it comes with the territory. But when I was about 7-ish, they sat me down. They said, "This is sex. This is everything about sex. This is what happens to a female when she matures, a male when he matures. These are all the other things about it. This is the science. This is the biology." Boring. But you know what? I was literally the only one in my friend group graduating from high school a virgin. They all were having sex. And I'm not saying one thing leads to the other, but none of them got the talk. None of them had any idea what sex was about other than whatever was feeling in their bodies. And but I had intellectualized it. And so to me, it wasn't so titillating anymore.
Exactly.
And I know that people say, oh, abstinence is the only way to go, but you still have to have the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. You have to have the conversation. And, really it all boils down to the fact that a lot of schools don't teach sex education anymore.
Because they're scared.
They're scared of the backlash from parents. So if that's the case, the parents are the ones. And the parents should be the ones to do it. I wouldn't want a third party teaching my children about sex.
You certainly don't want a sex trafficker teaching your kids
right,
about
exactly.
sex.
And that's what happens. That's what's happening with a lot of these situations. So this is why it is so important for people, again, step out of that comfort zone and be a parent. Have rules and regulations, but then have enough trust and respect for one another with you and your kids to have these conversations, because knowledge is a powerful thing. Lack of it is a dangerous thing. And, history is doomed to repeat itself if we don't do anything. So
Absolutely.
This will continue on and on and on, and it won't stop.
And I think, too, as uncomfortable as it is, it's important to talk about the difference between healthy touch and unhealthy touch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is the time to have the conversation again about stranger danger. If no one has had that conversation before, it's the time to do that.
That was a big thing in the 70s.
Yeah.
Stranger danger. That was back when little kids were playing at parks by themselves.
Yes.
6 years old and
absolutely.
I walked to the store at 10.
Yes.
There's no way on God's green earth that a parent would let a kid probably do that anymore.
Absolutely.
Who has a healthy relationship with their children, I should say.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, growing up in Texas, I grew up in Houston and used to play with the neighborhood kids. We'd run out from the woods. And the biggest thing we were worried about was mosquitoes, you know.
Oh, yeah. My parents' house had big, huge thing of woods across the street from their house. And the kids in the neighborhood, we spent hours in those woods. And I remember when we came upon the den of sex, and it was this like this carved out thing of trees, and there were all these porno magazines, and we were like, oh my gosh, what's that? Creepy, you know. God only knows who was hanging out over there. But yeah, kids back then, and
exactly.
But then again, back in the day, this was still going on, and it only happened at places like video arcades that don't exist anymore. So talk about your bracelet here.
Yeah, so I am wearing a bracelet from Branded Collective. And Branded Collective is a company started by two young ladies, Emily Landham and Lauren Carpenter. And they did jewelry, they did clothing, all to, basically to benefit nonprofits, and remarkable work. But what they did is they decided to focus more on the jewelry end. They initially were called T615, but now they're Branded Collective, and you can see them at www.brandedcollective.com.
So it's branded, BRANDED.
Right. And so what happens with this, and what they did is they've decided to partner with us. And they give opportunities for our survivors to basically participate in an entrepreneurship. So what happens is our survivors help to make these bracelets. It has a number on it, has branded, and has a number, indicates numbers of survivors. So collectively you can see how many survivors there have been over the years. This is 992. And
within your organization, you mean?
Just in general.
Okay.
And so they will have an initial on the bracelet, which is the initial of the survivor who has helped to make the bracelet. And you can go on their site, you can hear the story. You look that initial up, you'll read about the story of that survivor.
Shivers.
Yeah. And it's not their trafficking story, it's their story of what they're like as a human being, their likes, dislikes, their personality, so you get to know them. And if you, another feature that they've added recently is the number on the bracelet. You can actually contact your survivor through the number, tell them, this is survivor number, and you can go ahead and write a note to the survivor, a note of encouragement or whatever. And through this, what they'll do is they actually, they have, the survivor has something on a resume, can have something on a resume. So they learn how to create the jewelry, they learn how to take inventory, handle inventory, shipping, handle orders, and they get a stipend for it. So they get money that they can actually use, and like I said, a job on the resume that they've, created a piece of jewelry. And so
and so that can be found online, and again, I can put a link on Hey Human Podcast. And also here in Nashville, I know that the branded jewelry is carried at Serendipity. I'm sure probably at some other
some of the little like micro stores or whatever. They also make earrings now and some other necklaces and stuff, which are really wonderful too.
That's
so great cause, and they're two great ladies, and their hearts are really in it. So good cause.
Awesome. Run through your day real quick. What does your day look like?
Okay, so what I do is usually I'm in charge of all the educational efforts that we do. Also in charge of the volunteers that we have, and vetting them and getting them set up with groups and different opportunities to help us, either with direct service or office work or moving or
takes a village.
Activities. It takes a village, and we've got a really good village. Then also part of the educational piece that I do is doing different trainings for different organizations. And recently I did one for the Tennessee Hospitality and Tourism Association. And I'm trying to create for that, since hotels are a big piece of the human trafficking story. I'm trying to initiate a statewide initiative to train hotels statewide. And part of the initiative, or how we work statewide, is we have a Tennessee Anti-Slavery Alliance that's just been developed. There are 4 single points of contact. We handle in slavery is the Middle Tennessee region. Restore Corps is out of Memphis. They handle the West Tennessee region. Grow Free Tennessee is northeast, operate out of Knoxville. And then Second Life Chattanooga is, their headquarters are in Chattanooga, but they handle the southeast portion of the state and then also part of the northern region too. Mm-hmm. So with having that network, we're able to cover any human trafficking case, and we're the lead.
TASA.
Yeah, TASA. Mm-hmm. And Tennessee Anti-Slavery Alliance, and the Governor Haslam mandated the TBI's Human Trafficking Task Force to oversee cases of human trafficking, and so a bill was passed to get 4 additional agents from the TBI to help with the task force. So now with those 4 agents, each agent is assigned a region, one of the single points of contact. So when people call the Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline, they find out what region it's in, and that TBI agent works with local law enforcement to go ahead and look into the case, the reported case. They're also in charge of a lot of the training for law enforcement in their particular regions as well.
What is the statistic breakdown of sex trafficking versus all the other servitude and things? Do you know?
I'm not exactly sure what it is. The sex trafficking, though, is a bigger piece.
The bulk of it.
Unfortunately, it's the bulk of it. The labor trafficking comes as a closely behind there. And even though we do have agriculture, of course, in our state, it depends on the state, too.
I would imagine in Washington State, agriculture would be a bigger
absolutely
issue.
In California and Florida.
Sure.
So it makes in Texas. So it makes a difference. And if you look, when you look
and these are people that are forced to work long hours without real food or water or care,
Absolutely. And little or no pay, all in one location, too. They're housed in one location. And, again, like we talked about, their documents are confiscated. If you look on a map, if you look up any state, it's really interesting to look up an individual state and find statistics within that state, and you can usually pick out what the reasons are. If it's on the coast, like you said, Washington State or California, you look at what the agriculture is, or if they're close to a shipping channel or a large body of water, you can see how that is. And then also you'll see the reflection of as far as population too. Like you'll see, if you look on the website for Polaris, Polaris has some really good statistics. You look up, and there are hot spots up in the Northeast where New York City is, but there is no state that has not had a report of human trafficking, even like North Dakota and some of those areas that have a really reduced population. If you look at a Polaris map, actually, one of the things that's interesting is that there is not a hot spot or whatever for the state of Alaska, but there is a big human trafficking population within Alaska, a lot within the native Indian population in that area. So
First Nations.
Yeah, and so what you think, what a lot of times that happens is underreporting. So we know for a fact that every state has had at least one case of human trafficking, but sometimes you don't see it a lot of times because it's underreported, or
they have their own jurisdictions as well.
Yeah, they have their own jurisdictions, and then also depending on how well law enforcement is trained too.
Sure.
I mean, to train law enforcement is a real big challenge to get them on board for it. So, yeah.
Man, for people listening who may know someone or see something or whatever, do you have some, so that it's endslaverytn.org is your... www.endslaverytn.org. And if you see something here in the state of Tennessee, the Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline is 1-855-558-6484. Operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you may be, the information you give may be working, help on a case that's already exists, may open a new case. If it doesn't even lead to something, again, it's better to say something than not say anything at all. Right. And there's a national phone number as well, 888-373-7888. And you could also text help or info to 233-733. And again, I'll post all that stuff, all the things we've been talking about on the HeyHumanPodcast.com on the links page. What are a couple documentaries really quick that people might be able to watch?
Yes, some of the really good documentaries are Nefarious, which is really good. Nefarious, I like Nefarious because it shows globally human trafficking, and then it turns around and focuses on Nashville, so you get a little bit of each of those pieces. Also, the one that you had mentioned earlier,
I Am Jane Doe,
right?
was exceptional.
That's really good. Some of the books, if you Half the Sky is a good book. Fallen is another one that was written by a victim of human trafficking. On our website, we also have some other suggestions for some other medias going. There's a great movie, Very Young Girls, that's out. That's a documentary that I don't know if you can get access. I think you can go ahead and get it on Amazon. I highly recommend it. And one of the best books ever is Girls Like Us by Rachel Lloyd. That's a must-read for anybody that's interested. She is a survivor of human trafficking, and she started an organization in New York called the GEMS organization, which is very similar to what we do. And she is, this book is really shows how it starts, the vulnerabilities, the lures, and then how someone can actually recover from it and make good out of it. So. Mm-hmm.
Jill, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Sue. Really appreciate it.
You're doing great work, and I mean, it's to me it's unfathomable that this is an issue that exists in the world, and at the same time, like I said at the top of this hour, it doesn't surprise me either, and it's I just hope that it gets better.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Oh, I hope, pray too.
Yeah.
I hope, pray too. But, opportunities like this are big steps. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.